Wait, she owns this school? That's what Diana's attorney said out loud, forgetting where he was. The room froze. Diana turned to look at me. Really look at me. For the first time since she'd called my children bastards and paid to have us removed. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. 3 years before that moment, I was a different woman. I drove a second-hand Civic with a cracked dashboard vent and a check engine light I'd been ignoring for 4 months, because I knew what it was, and I knew it wasn't urgent, and I had 2 children and a business, and there was always something more pressing. I packed my kids' lunches every morning, peanut butter and honey for Jordan, turkey with no mustard for Imani, because Imani had decided mustard was the worst thing in the world, and she was 7, and she was allowed to have opinions. I believed that if you kept your head down and loved your people right, and worked hard and showed up, the people who claimed to love your family would protect you in return. I was wrong about all three. My name is Celeste Monroe, and what I'm about to tell you is not a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when a woman finally stops waiting for people to see her worth and decides to own it herself. Intro CTA. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. A new story drops every week. Now let's get into this. Atlanta, Georgia. 3 years earlier. Celeste Monroe was 34 years old, and she had built something real. Not glamorous. Real. She ran a bookkeeping and financial consulting practice from the converted back bedroom of the house she and her husband Darius shared in a quiet corner of southwest Atlanta. 2 kids. A mortgage they managed with discipline and care. A life that was ordinary in the best possible way. Full, steady, warm. Her son Jordan was 10 years old, serious-faced and precise, the kind of boy who corrected the spelling on restaurant menus and who could do mental math faster than most adults in any room he entered. Her daughter Imani was 7, loud and tender in exact equal measure, a child who still climbed into Celeste's lap during thunderstorms even though she insisted, every single time, that she wasn't scared. She drew pictures of herself as a doctor every week. Every week, the same girl in a white coat, the same careful stethoscope, the same building behind her. She never ran out of belief in that picture. Celeste had a way about her that was hard to name, but impossible to miss. She wasn't loud. She wasn't the kind of person who needed to fill every silence. But she was the kind of steady that other people leaned on without realizing they were doing it. The friend you called when something needed to be thought all the way through, the colleague whose opinion you wanted before you made the call. Her clients trusted her the way you trust something that has never once let you down. She had 6 of them at the time, small businesses mostly, people who needed someone careful and precise to handle the money side while they handled everything else. She kept a journal, leather-bound, worn soft at the corners from years of handling, the stitching fraying on the spine in a way that made it look loved rather than neglected. It had been her mother's, Evelyn Monroe, who had passed 4 years earlier from a stroke at 61, a year before Imani was old enough to really remember her. Inside the front cover, in Evelyn's deliberate, unhurried cursive, "Everything you need, you already carry." Celeste wrote in it every morning before the house woke up. Budgets, client notes, goals written out in the present tense, the way Evelyn had taught her. Things that were almost prayers, less formal than prayers, more like conversations with someone she trusted completely but couldn't quite see. She kept the journal on her nightstand, and she kept it the way some people keep photographs of the people they've lost, not because they need reminding of the face, but because they need reminding of the feeling. Darius worked in finance at a mid-size investment firm downtown. He was handsome and easy with people and had grown up in a family with money, which had given him the particular confidence of a man who had never been in a room where he wasn't immediately comfortable. He loved Celeste. She had believed that once, fully and without condition. Maybe he had believed it himself. The children attended Northfield Preparatory Academy, a private school on Atlanta's north side. Darius's family had been among the school's original founding donors, decades before either of the children was born. It was the kind of history that sounded like belonging, legacy, continuity, your children walking corridors your family helped build. Celeste would understand in time that it was also a leash. That legacy and belonging, in that family's hands, were the same instrument. One morning, before anyone else stirred, Celeste opened her journal to a fresh page and wrote something she had told no one. She had been watching a commercial property listing for 3 months, a school building actually, on the north side of the city, operating under financial pressure that had begun showing up in the county filings if you knew where to look, and Celeste always knew where to look. She wrote down the address. She wrote a number. She wrote a question mark. She closed the journal. She went and made breakfast. She did not know yet what that question mark would become. The first time Diana Monroe disrespected her, Celeste almost let herself believe she had imagined it. Diana was Darius's older sister, 51 to his 42, and she had been the dominant personality in that family for as long as anyone could remember. She was the kind of woman who weaponized elegance, who wore money like a language she'd been born speaking, who moved through social rooms with the ease of someone who had never once had to wonder whether she belonged. She'd never liked Celeste. Celeste had understood that from the very first Sunday dinner, 4 years into the marriage, when Diana had looked at her the way you look at a piece of furniture you can tell someone selected in a hurry. But Diana was too clever to be openly rude. The cruelties she chose were small and precise, plausibly deniable, the kind that, if you described them to someone else, especially someone who didn't know Diana, would make you sound like a woman who was looking for problems. The fundraiser gala for Northfield was held each October at a downtown Atlanta hotel ballroom. It was one of the school calendar's anchor events. Board members, major donors, legacy families. Celeste had attended for 4 consecutive years, had volunteered on the planning committee for 2 of them, had designed the silent auction format that raised 30% more than the previous year's model. She was not new to this room. She was not unfamiliar with the people in it. Diana found her near the silent auction tables and steered her toward the school board members with the casual authority of a woman who had done this exact thing many times and expected to keep doing it. "This is Darius's wife," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, to the board chair and the 2 people beside him. "She does taxes or something. Not bookkeeping and financial consulting, not the woman who redesigned your fundraiser format. Taxes. Or something." The board chair smiled politely. The woman to his left nodded with the particular vagueness of someone who has not been listening closely. Celeste said, "It's wonderful to meet you all," and held her smile perfectly, and felt the specific familiar burn of a woman who knows precisely what just happened, but understands clearly that reacting will be used against her before the evening is over. That night, she wrote it down. 3 lines, factual, no emotion, date, location, exact words. She had learned from watching her mother navigate difficult people that documentation was not paranoia, it was preparation. The small things kept coming, one at a time, spaced out just enough that each one could be dismissed on its own. 3 weeks after the gala, at Jordan's spelling bee in the school auditorium, Diana arrived with Darius and positioned herself between them in the seating row. When Celeste moved to sit beside her husband, Diana said, sweetly, always sweetly. Oh, there's actually more room on the end. You'd be so much more comfortable. In front of 3 other parents and 2 teachers who were setting up nearby, Celeste went to the end of the row. She sat down. She watched her son walk to the microphone and correctly spell every word they gave him and win second place. And she smiled the entire time, because Jordan was watching her face from the stage, and she was not about to let him see anything other than pride. She wrote that down too. The parent board stopped including her. It happened slowly and then all at once, the way that certain losses do. Celeste had volunteered for 2 years on the literacy committee, the fundraising planning group, the spring carnival. Then the meeting invitations began to come less frequently, then with less notice, then not at all. When she asked the parent board coordinator, a woman named Sandra who had always been perfectly pleasant to her face, Sandra smiled too wide and said something about restructuring the committee structure. When Celeste went to Principal Hartwell, he listened carefully and apologized in the vague, practiced way of a man who has been told to apologize without being told what he's apologizing for. She filed a formal concern with the school's diversity and inclusion coordinator. She received an acknowledgement email. Nothing changed. At home, the erosion was quieter, but the direction was the same. Darius had always been the kind of man who made a room feel easy, quick to laugh, generous with his attention, someone who could talk to anyone about anything. But the warmth had begun to hollow out when it was just the two of them. He came home later than he used to, with explanations that were complete enough, but never quite full. When Celeste raised concerns about Diana, about the parent board, about the way she was being edged out of spaces she had earned, Darius listened with a patience that had started to feel more like strategy than love. Celeste, you're being sensitive. Diana's always been strong-willed. Not everything is an attack. She heard that sentence, in slight variation, 11 times over 6 months. She wrote down how many times. Then came the moment she noticed his phone. For the entirety of their marriage, Darius had left his phone face up on the kitchen counter. Charger by the stove, screen unlocked. The casual transparency of a man who was not thinking about being caught because there was nothing to catch. Then, over the course of a few weeks, the habit shifted so gradually she almost didn't register it until they had already changed completely. Face down on the counter. A new lock screen code. A habit of leaving the room when calls came in. Small things, each one individually explainable, collectively impossible to ignore. She said nothing. She started paying attention to everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March. Celeste was loading the dishwasher before her 9 o'clock client call when Darius's phone buzzed on the counter, went quiet, and then buzzed again 30 seconds later with the soft double pulse of a voicemail notification. Something in her, the part that had been paying attention for months, the part that had written things down and noticed patterns and felt the shape of something without being able to name it, told her to listen. She picked up the phone. She typed his birthday. He hadn't thought to change the passcode yet, or maybe he had been too confident to bother. She found the voicemail. She pressed play. It was Diana's voice. The call had been meant for Darius. She had believed she'd ended it. She hadn't. What the voicemail captured was 47 seconds of Diana speaking to someone on her end, mid-conversation, completely unguarded. No performance, no social architecture. Just Diana the way Diana actually was when she thought no one was listening. She said the timeline needed to move faster. She said the lawyer already had everything he needed. She said that once the divorce petition was filed, the argument about Celeste's business income would collapse because Diana had already been in contact with two of Celeste's largest clients. Celeste did not know this yet. She would lose them both within the week, and had raised serious concerns about Celeste's reliability and professional standing. She said Darius would get the children because the court would never award primary custody to a woman running a failing operation out of a spare bedroom. She said, "She's got nothing, Darius. She never had anything. This will be clean." 47 seconds. Celeste stood at the kitchen counter with the phone in her hand and listened to it twice. Then she set it down. She finished loading the dishwasher. She dried her hands. She made a cup of coffee. She sat at the kitchen table for 4 minutes and stared at the window. Then she picked up her own phone and looked up attorneys. She told no one. She did not confront Darius. She did not change a single visible thing about her behavior or her routine. She cooked dinner that night and helped with homework, and gave Imani a bath, and read her the same 3 books they always read. And when Darius came home, she said, "How was your day?" And he said, "Fine." And she said, "Good." And not one thing showed on her face. Over the next 3 days, she moved through the house like a woman taking inventory. Bank statements, going back 18 months. The LLC documents Darius kept in the filing cabinet in his office that he had never thought to lock because he had never thought she would look. Investment account statements. The car's glove compartment. Tuesday morning, during school drop-off, she found a second phone behind the registration. She photographed it. She put it back exactly as she found it. She called an attorney named Patricia Webb, a woman her college roommate had used in a divorce 8 years ago, and described, without hesitation, as the kind of lawyer who doesn't lose. Celeste met with Patricia on a Wednesday, laid out everything she had, and hired her on the spot. She was ready to be quiet and patient and strategic for however long it took. 11 days later, on a Thursday morning in late March, she walked Jordan and Imani into Northfield for the school day, hugged them both at the side entrance, and was walking back to her car when she heard Diana's voice. Diana was 20 feet away, near the side entrance, phone pressed to her ear, standing in the shadow of a wall of shrubs that faced the parking lot. She had her back partially turned. She believed she was alone. "Those bastard children of a useless mother have no place in that school. I've already spoken to Principal Hartwell. It just needs paperwork." Celeste was standing between 2 parked cars when those words landed. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She understood, in that moment, with total clarity, that she was being given something, that standing still and silent and listening all the way to the end was more valuable than any confrontation she could have chosen instead. She stayed until Diana finished the call and walked back through the side entrance. Diana never looked in her direction. Celeste got in her Civic. She sat in the Northfield parking lot for 60 seconds with the engine off. Then she drove directly to Patricia Webb's office without calling ahead and sat in the waiting area until Patricia could see her, and said, when Patricia walked in, "I need you to hear what I just heard." 2 days later, on a Friday morning, Jordan and Imani were called out of class during second period. Celeste received a call from the front office and was asked to come in immediately. When she arrived, Principal Hartwell, who had sat across from her at committee meetings for 2 years, who had shaken her hand at every gala, who had once told her that Northfield was lucky to have a parent as invested as she was, read from a prepared letter in a voice that was controlled and professional and gave away nothing. The children were being expelled, effective immediately. Conduct irregularities, as outlined in the school's behavioral code. No specific incident named. No warning previously issued. The letter was dated 3 days prior. Jordan was 10 years old, and he sat in that chair and looked at his mother's face, the way children look when they are trying to understand the magnitude of something and reading the adult in front of them to know how scared to be. Imani was 7, and she understood less of the specific words, but she understood the feeling of the room completely, and she climbed out of her chair and into Celeste's lap without asking and put her face against her mother's shoulder. Celeste held her daughter. She thanked Principal Hartwell for his time, in a voice that was clear and even and gave him nothing. No anger, no break, no satisfaction. And she walked her children to the car. She drove them to her friend Renata's house and asked Renata to watch them for a few hours. Renata took one look at Celeste's face and said nothing except, "I got them. Go." Celeste sat in Renata's driveway for 10 minutes. She gave herself exactly 10 minutes for every feeling that was there. And there were many, and they were large, and she let them come all the way through. When the 10 minutes were over, she called Patricia Webb and said, "It's moving. What do we do next?" That night, Darius did not come home. The following morning, a process server knocked on the door at 8:45 with the divorce petition. The divorce was designed to take everything, every single thing. Darius's legal team, paid for, as Celeste's forensic consultant would later document and prove, through a series of transfers from accounts held by Diana, moved against every pillar of Celeste's life with methodical coordination. They challenged her bookkeeping income as inconsistent and unreliable for purposes of the custody evaluation. They submitted a declaration describing her home workspace as inadequate for providing a stable environment for minor children. They petitioned for temporary sole custody and received it within 60 days. Jordan and Imani left the house they had grown up in and moved into Darius's rented townhouse. Celeste got alternate weekends and Wednesday evenings. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta. The monthly rent was manageable, barely. The kitchen window faced a parking structure. She put a plant on the windowsill anyway, a pathos she had taken from the house, because it was hardy and it was hers. The business unraveled the following month. The construction firm she had served for 4 years, and the commercial real estate developer she had advised through 2 full growth cycles, both dropped her within the same week. Both cited anonymous concerns about her professional reliability and licensure status. Her CPA license, she was, at the time, still operating under a bookkeeping license, but she had never once had a compliance issue, was fully active. There were no concerns on record. There was only Diana on the phone, exercising the particular power of a woman with a large network and no conscience about how she used it. Celeste filed complaints with the licensing board. She documented everything. She received acknowledgments. She received no resolution. Word moved through the Northfield parent community and through the family's church congregation. The congregation Celeste had attended for 6 years, had given her time and money to, had served on the hospitality committee of for 3 of those years. The word was that Celeste had been removed from the Northfield Parent Board due to financial impropriety, that there had been questions about her handling of committee funds, that it was, unfortunately, not a complete surprise given certain things people said they had noticed. None of it was true. Not one word of it was true. But truth requires a platform to travel, and Celeste had been removed from every platform she had ever used to build credibility in that community. The rumor had somewhere to go. The correction had nowhere to land. She lost 2 more clients from referral circles where Diana's version of her had arrived before she could. She lost a Wednesday evening with the children because Darius rescheduled twice in the same month and then submitted a court declaration claiming she had failed to show up. A declaration her attorney responded to with 4 sentences and a stack of time-stamped text messages, but which cost her 3 weeks of normal contact while the court sorted it out. There was a night in late November, deep winter in a city that doesn't get real winter, just a cold that finds the gaps in old buildings and settles in. When Celeste came home to the apartment after dropping Jordan and Imani back at Darius's house following a Sunday visit, she had cooked them their favorite meal, oxtails and rice. The recipe Evelyn had given her, the one Imani called Sunday food and Jordan called the good kind. She had watched them eat too much and laugh at something on television, and she had held Imani against her side for a long time while a movie played, and she had kissed the top of Jordan's head in a way he tolerated, instead of pulling away from because he was 10 and working hard at being too old for that. And yet. Then she had driven them back. She had handed them over at the door. She had watched the door close. She drove to the apartment. She sat in the parking lot for a while without getting out of the car. When she finally went upstairs, she sat down at the kitchen table and didn't do anything for a long time. Didn't reach for her laptop, didn't make tea, just sat. Then she reached into her bag and took out her mother's journal. She had started carrying it with her everywhere, the way you carry the one thing you cannot stand to lose. She opened it to the front cover. She read the inscription her mother had written in that unhurried hand. Everything you need, you already carry. She sat with those words for longer than she could have told you. Then she turned toward the back of the journal, to a blank page she had been saving without naming it to herself. She picked up a pen. She wrote 2 words. She wrote a dollar figure. She closed the journal. She went to bed. She set the alarm for 5:30. In the morning, she got up and went back to work. She told nobody what she was doing. That was deliberate. The people who had underestimated her were only dangerous if they knew what she was building. Silence was not defeat. Silence was the condition her next move required. She took small clients first and worked them with the kind of care that is only possible when you have lost enough to know exactly what work is worth. A barber shop on Cleveland Avenue owned by a man named Desmond, who needed 3 years of tangled personal and business expenses sorted into something the IRS would recognize. A caterer named Yolanda who did events and never understood why she was always breaking even despite full bookings. Celeste found $16,000 in overlooked deductions in the first month. A home health aide named Brenda who wanted to go legitimate and start her own company and didn't know where to begin. Celeste sat with her at the kitchen table of Brenda's apartment twice a week for 6 weeks, and they built the whole thing from the structure up. Every single one of those clients referred someone new within 60 days. She retook her CPA exam. She studied at the kitchen table after the children's Wednesday evening calls, in the hours when the apartment was at its most quiet. She sat the exam in February in a testing center in Buckhead and passed with the highest composite score in her testing cohort. She told no one. She updated her business license and changed the email footer and continued working. She hired a financial forensics consultant named Gail, a specialist who had testified as an expert witness in federal cases and who over the following 14 months constructed a civil fraud case from the ground up, tracing every shell transfer Diana had used to fund Darius's legal campaign against Celeste's family. Gail was patient and precise and thorough in the way of a woman who understands that the document you prepare carefully today is the one that ends the conversation in court. The case was filed quietly. It moved through the system the way serious things move, without announcement, gathering weight. Diana, in those 14 months, continued being Diana. She attended school events at Northfield. She appeared at Sunday service at the church. She was seen at benefits and fundraisers and the kinds of social occasions that constitute a public life in a certain circle of Atlanta. She did not check on Celeste. She had no reason to think she needed to. Celeste enrolled Jordan and Imani at Brightway Academy, a charter school 20 minutes from the apartment that she had researched with the same discipline she brought to everything. Reading outcome data, visiting the campus twice unannounced, talking to parents in the parking lot, observing a classroom before she ever spoke to administration. It was smaller than Northfield. The hallways were louder. The teachers stayed late and knew the students by name. Within a semester, Jordan had a math teacher who treated him like a peer and pushed him the way gifted children need to be pushed. Imani joined a drama program where she performed in front of real audiences and where someone finally confirmed what her mother had always known, that Imani's voice, when she was given a real reason to use it, filled an entire room. They were thriving. That was the real transformation, not what was coming. The transformation was the Sunday morning when Celeste dropped them at Brightway and watched them run across the yard toward their friends and understood, with a clarity that did not require any ceremony, that the thing Diana had tried to take from her children had not been taken at all. It had just found somewhere better to grow. The property listing was still active. Northfield Preparatory Academy had been in financial difficulty for 18 months. The departure of its largest institutional donor, a dispute at the board level that had become personal before it became financial, had left a gap in the operating budget that the board had never adequately addressed. Enrollment was down 11%. 3 of the school's most experienced teachers had left for better-funded schools, including a science department head whom parents had cited as irreplaceable, and a second-grade teacher named Ms. Lorraine, who had quietly been pushed out after raising objections to a board decision Diana's allies had championed. The board engaged a private broker to explore a quiet sale. They did not want press. They wanted a clean buyer with sufficient capital and minimal complications. The broker put out discreet inquiries. The listing was available to anyone who knew how to look. Celeste knew how to look. The LLC had existed for 2 years before the divorce. She had opened it in her mother's name, Evelyn Monroe Consulting LLC, in a quiet moment of forward thinking that she could not have fully articulated at the time, except that she had felt, without naming it, that there might come a day when she would need something that was entirely her own. She had funded it modestly but consistently, from income she had kept separate from the accounts Darius's name was on, money she thought of as patient. It had been patient for 2 years. It was ready. Diana and Darius's legal team had been thorough. They had found the accounts they were looking for. They had not gone looking for Evelyn Monroe Consulting LLC because they had never thought to ask whether Celeste Monroe was the kind of woman who planned ahead. The acquisition closed on a Thursday in October. $1.4 million, cash and structured note. The broker was professional and discreet. The board signed without fanfare, relieved to have found a quiet solution. The transaction was filed with Fulton County. There was no press release, no social media, no announcement of any kind. That Sunday afternoon, Celeste went to the building alone before the administrative handover was complete. She walked the hallways in the low afternoon light. She passed the classrooms, the library, the auditorium where Jordan had won second place at the spelling bee, while Diana moved her to the end of the row. She walked to the front office. She walked to the office that had belonged to Principal Hartwell, who had quietly resigned 3 months prior, for reasons the remaining board members described as personal, and she stepped inside and sat down behind the desk. She reached into her bag. She took out her mother's journal. She placed it on the desk, open to the front cover. Everything you need, you already carry. She sat in the quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Patricia Webb. Let's talk about the re-enrollment process for 2 students. The invitation arrived by certified mail 2 weeks later, addressed to Celeste Monroe from the administrative office of Northfield Preparatory Academy, which was to say, from herself. She had asked her new director of operations to send it through official channels so that when it arrived at Darius's house, where her mail was still technically forwarded, there would be no ambiguity about what it was. An invitation to the Northfield Legacy Celebration, an event the new administration had organized to honor the school's founding families and introduce the community to new leadership. Ms. Monroe was listed as the guest of honor. Jordan and Imani were with her for the weekend when it arrived. Imani watched her read it at the kitchen table and asked what it was. "An invitation," Celeste said. "To what?" "To something that's mine." The morning of the event, Patricia Webb called at 8:47. Her voice was measured the way it was when the news was not yet good. An anonymous challenge had been filed against a clause in the acquisition agreement, a technical question about a prior lien notation in the title documentation, which the filer claimed had been improperly resolved. Patricia said she was working on it. She said it was likely clerical. Likely. For 90 minutes, Celeste sat in her apartment with her phone on the table in front of her. She did not pace. She did not call anyone. She sat with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have already been through the worst thing and know that what comes after it is manageable. At 10:19, Patricia called back. The lien had been fully discharged at closing, a misfiled document in the county's digitization process. Human error, now corrected in the public record. The acquisition was clean. The challenge had been withdrawn. Celeste sat for another minute. Then she stood up, got dressed, and went to reclaim what was hers. She arrived at 6:45, before guests, to walk the building with Lorraine. Ms. Lorraine, the second-grade teacher Diana's board had pushed out 2 years prior, who Celeste had called personally and asked to come back at a salary 15% above what she'd been making when she left. Lorraine had said yes before Celeste finished the sentence. They walked the building together without speaking much. There wasn't much to say that the building didn't already say on its own. Guests arrived at 7. 60, perhaps 70 people. Founding family members, former major donors, community leaders, a few educators from partner institutions. The event was in the main atrium, arranged simply by Lorraine with round tables and warm overhead lighting and a podium near the far wall. Diana arrived at 7:12 with Darius. She wore a cream blazer and moved through the room with the confidence of a woman who had always been welcome in this particular space and expected to keep being welcome. She greeted people by their first names. She touched each arm in that practiced way she had. She was performing belonging, the same way she had always performed it, because she had never had to do anything other than perform it. She did not look for Celeste. Celeste was not a person she was looking for. At 7:20, the school's director of operations walked Celeste in through a side entrance and escorted her to the head table. A few people saw immediately. A woman Celeste recognized from the parent board gripped the arm of the person next to her. There was a murmur in the part of the room that saw. Not loud, just the particular sound of a room revising its understanding of a situation. Diana was mid-sentence in a conversation near the center table when she registered, at the edge of her vision, that the quality of attention in the room had changed. The way attention changes when something is happening somewhere and people are orienting toward it. She turned, following the current of it, and found Celeste. She was standing at the head table, not as support staff, not as a caterer or an organizer or an assistant to someone important. Standing there the way you stand when you are where you are supposed to be. Diana's expression moved through its stages with the speed of someone trying to process something that does not fit the map she has been using. Recognition, something that reached for dismissal and could not find its footing. She looked around the room for confirmation, for someone to look back at her and silently agree that this was not what it appeared to be. The room gave her nothing. At 7:35, the MC stepped to the podium and spoke briefly about Northfield's history and what the school had meant to the community over the decades. He said it was his honor to introduce the person whose investment, financial and personal, had ensured the school's future. Please welcome the owner and executive director of Northfield Preparatory Academy, Ms. Celeste Monroe. Celeste stood. She thanked the room. She thanked the founding families for building something worth saving. She spoke about her children, about what it means to believe so fully in a child's future that you will protect the institutions meant to help them get there. She spoke about what schools do when they're working the way schools should, not just the academics, but the feeling a child carries when they walk into a building and know they are expected and valued and safe. She announced 2 new scholarship endowments. The first, for academic merit. The second, and here she paused, not for effect, but because the feeling was real and she let it be real, named the Evelyn Monroe Scholarship Fund, for a woman who taught her that everything you need, you already carry. She did not look at Diana while she spoke. At every round table, Lorraine had placed the evening's program booklet, school history, a welcome letter, a donor recognition page. On the inside back cover, 1 line, no attribution, in the same font as the rest. Everything you need, you already carry. Diana's attorney, Gerald, the man whose name appeared on the custody declaration filings, who had helped build the legal architecture of what had been done to Celeste's family, had been working through the program booklet while she spoke. In the appendix, as a matter of public record, Celeste had included the acquisition filing. It listed the registered owner of Northfield Preparatory Academy. Gerald read the name. He read it again. He forgot for a moment where he was. Wait, she owns this school? He said it out loud into a room that had already gone quiet to listen to Celeste speak. The words landed the way a stone lands in still water, and then the silence after them was complete and total. The room did not move. Diana turned, slowly, the way people turn when they already know what they are going to see, and their body is resisting what their mind has already understood. She looked at Celeste. Really looked. Possibly for the first time in 3 years, past the story she had built about who Celeste was, and what Celeste had, and what Celeste was capable of. She looked at her the way you look at something when the ground beneath a very long assumption has just given way. Celeste met her eyes. She held them for 3 seconds. She did not smile. She did not perform. She gave Diana nothing. Nothing triumphant. Nothing cruel. She simply looked at her the way a woman looks at the thing that tried to break her and did not. Then she turned back to the room, because the room deserved the rest of what she had to say. "My children," she said, and her voice was level and clear. "Jordan and Imani Monroe are enrolled here. Both of them, full scholarship, effective Monday." She let that settle. Then she spoke one final paragraph about the civil fraud case, not with heat, not with score settling in her voice, just with the flat, factual tone of a woman addressing a matter of public record. The judgment had been filed with the court. It was in the public docket. The names were available to anyone who chose to look. She thanked the room for their continued support of the school and for what she knew the Northfield community could become. She stepped back from the podium. The applause began somewhere in the back third of the room and moved forward until the room was in it together. Celeste stood straight and received it simply, without performance, the way you receive something you worked for. After the room emptied and the staff began clearing tables, Celeste walked the main hallway alone. Her heels were quiet on the floor. The lights were still warm. She passed the library, the science rooms, the water fountain near the second grade wing. She stopped at the bulletin board outside room 12. Lorraine had asked the new second grade teacher to put something up for the evening. On the board were 2 drawings, printed and pinned with care. Jordan's was a map, precise lines, labels in his careful block print, his name in the lower right corner the way he always signed things, like he wanted there to be no confusion about who had made it. Imani's was the one that stopped her. A girl in a white coat, a stethoscope around her neck, a building behind her. The same picture Imani had been drawing every week, her whole life. But in the sky above the building, in the purple crayon Imani used for important things, her daughter had written 2 words: "My school." Celeste stood in front of that drawing for a long time. She thought about her mother. She thought about the journal on the desk in her office down the hall, the worn leather cover, the fraying spine, the inscription that had kept her company through the worst of it. She thought about the morning she had sat alone at the kitchen table with nothing left and had turned to a blank page and written 2 words and a number that had seemed, at the time, like an impossible thing and had turned out to be the most possible thing she had ever done. She thought about how long she had believed that enduring the contempt of people who did not deserve her loyalty was the price of belonging. She thought about what she had paid for that belief, and about all the people who had watched her pay it and said nothing, and about the fact that she did not need their apology and was not waiting for it. The people who try to remove you from the room never understand. They were just clearing space for you to own it. She straightened the edge of Imani's drawing on the bulletin board. She walked back to her office. She picked up her mother's journal from the desk, held it for a moment, and put it in her bag. She turned off the light. She walked out of the building. She drove home. Outro CTA. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Subscribe for a new story every single week. And I want to know what you think in the comments. Would you have spoken up the moment Diana humiliated you in public? Or would you have stayed quiet, kept building, and let the building do the talking? Tell me below.